sacked and replaced actually by one of King Abdullah's sons. And many changes are being made in the south as a result. We often hear about the intolerance that is in Saudi textbooks. There has been. They're trying their best to root it out. I'll stop at that point on human rights, because I'm sure other people would have other things to say, but that's my basic point about that. And now let's turn to the second part of the motion, fight terrorism. Well, I think it's extraordinary to have a discussion as to whether Saudi Arabia is prepared to fight terrorism. Since May 2003, Saudi Arabia has been engaged in a direct fight with Al-Qaeda in the American Peninsula. There were bombings in the streets when I first went to live there. There were attacks in expatriate compounds. The Saudi Arabian government devoted, maybe it's just sheerly a matter of survival, but devoted the utmost of its resources to defeating Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They have, on the whole, inside Saudi Arabia itself, very efficient lists of most wanted members of Al-Qaeda, many of them killed, many of them captured, many have escaped to Yemen. And we know, for example, thanks to the work of the Saudi government, the names of 38, 39 Al-Qaeda members who are in Yemen and who are organizing to come back into the kingdom itself. So the idea that the Saudis are not fighting terrorism, I just again find an absolutely bizarre proposition to make. It is true that in the past, the sort of extremism, the sort of intolerance encouraged in Saudi education, which they are now trying to change, undoubtedly led to extremism in the Arabian Peninsula. They have seen their mistakes. I mean, I often think Saudi Arabia is like one of those friends who can never bring themselves to say sorry. You'll never get the Saudis to say sorry for their role in 9/11, but it's my contention, is what I've written my book about, that since 9/11 they have been acting sorry. King Abdullah has engaged in all sorts of reforms, and I'll finish with the final point on this, because I don't want to exceed my 10 minutes. Saudi Arabia is famous throughout the world for its extremist rehabilitation program. It is a model for these programs around the world. Again, you can criticize it. You can say it's not perfect. You can say some have escaped. You can say some have been recidivist, although they have a 10% recidivist rate, which compares to 55% recidivism rate in American jails. So it's not perfect, but it's on the way. And that would be my opening gesture and proposition to all of you in this debate. I am not saying Saudi Arabia is perfect, but please, let us not be condescending. This is a major independent world power. It is one of the G20 largest powers in the world. There are aspects of a third world country about it. When I left 10 days ago, rain started, there were terrible floods. As my dear friend May Yamani here pointed out at the last debate we took part in, Jeddah was woefully unprepared for these floods. 113 people died. It's disgraceful. Do we condemn Saudi Arabia totally for that? Look at what happened in America, which the greatest power in the world couldn't handle the typhoon that flattened New Orleans and was open to all these same criticisms of unpreparedness and corruption. What has happened as a result of these floods? Already, the Saudi newspapers are up in arms. Here's another thing I'm sure other people will touch on, freedom of expression. The Saudi newspapers, of course, never criticize the royal family. Saudi newspapers are owned, on the whole, by members of the royal family. But when it comes to human rights, they are very alive. Young Saudi journalists cut their teeth on stories of young girls being forcibly married to older men, on mistreatment of immigrant workers, on various other social ills of the country. These things are now getting debated, just as at the moment the corruption and incompetence that led to the floods is being debated. It's not a perfect country, but it's a country that I would submit is moving in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Robert, thank you very much. But two clarifications. One is that in this House, in this Parliament, we debate everything from America, Guantanamo Bay, to the British laws. So, Saudi Arabia is no exception. And we've had, this society outreach has had debates on Israel, and our first 3 debates were related to Palestinians, Gaza, Israel, women, and the Middle East. So you can't criticize us for picking on Saudi Arabia. I think we're having a very open and honest debate. And maybe, I think on a personal level, this debate might move into the chamber, but that's later on. But let's ask now our next speaker, who's Michael Thomas, the Director General at the Middle East Association. Michael Thomas, I've known him for many years. He's been very involved with trade and has a very distinguished long career, including working at the highest level in trade-related matters in Kuwait, UAE, Turkey, Iran, and in the whole of the Middle East region. So it's my pleasure now to ask Michael Thomas to say a few words.
Well, thank you. Is this on?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Lord Ackwood. As this is my first discussion at one of your debates, and I wasn't quite sure whether we were on the record, which I presume we are.
We are.
And it's not Chatham House rules either.
No.
I thought I would prepare a talk for you, but later on maybe I'll become a freer talker. First of all, Lord Ackwood, I'm most grateful to the committee for being invited to speak on this topic. The question proposed of human rights, civil liberties and terrorism is a curious one, and to my mind rather encapsulates the lack of understanding that there is between some people, mainly politicians and the media, and ourselves about this great kingdom. I first went to Saudi Arabia in 1973, where I lived and set up offices in Dammam and Riyadh. It was a completely different country in those days. The main roads had not yet been built. And Saudi was not fully developed as it is today. And Saudi Arabia was in those days just waking up to its first oil boom, which was a momentous occasion. Up until then, the kingdom had been a completely self-contained country, with the UK and the West doing nicely out of what was at the time, and must have seemed, a rather beneficial energy deal. The first oil boom, and we are now in our third, had a dramatic effect on propelling a country which for 1,000 years or so had been and still is the pillar of Islam and the custodian of the 2 holy places in the modern world. Having been involved with this region on a practical level, I do believe that the question posed at best shows a certain amount of ignorance and at worst a certain amount of arrogance. I will now counter with another question. Who are we to impose our Western ideas and ideals on a country which is, after all, not Western, but Eastern? I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the system you see in Saudi Arabia is not imposed by government, but desired by the people, i.e. democracy, but in a different form. The government in Saudi Arabia is the guardian of the system. To attempt to impose the standards of a Western industrialized country on an Eastern Islamic country is fundamentally flawed. Yeah. One needs to think of human rights in the context of culture and historic civilization of a great kingdom. Whilst I do not deny for 1 minute that many Islamic immigrants are taking advantage of our way of life in Britain and the human rights enjoyed by us in the UK, that is a choice that they have made, and they are most welcome to join us. However, here in the UK, I do believe we have gone too far. I am not happy about EU legislation on human rights. This goes against all the norms, particularly when most of us have families that were in one way or another involved in defending this island against invasion and terror during the Second World War. To find that we are unable to deport suspected terrorists and such dissidents, and as Mr. Massari and Saad al-Faqi, back to their countries of origin, whilst allowing them to set up a network in the UK aimed at disrupting their own country's political systems, our allies, is to my mind a bridge too far for UK civil liberties. However, looking in on the kingdom from the outside, we must immediately take up arms against some of our left-wing Labour MPs, who clearly have no real experience or understanding of Saudi Arabia as a country. Thank you. They go for headline-grabbing items such as women rights,